Close your eyes. The day is done now. The outside world, its noise, its rush, its endless doing, can wait. You
are here, safe, still, listening. The air in your room is warm and still. Somewhere outside, a breeze stirs the
leaves, but here you are tucked under your blanket, your breath growing slower, your thoughts softening like the twilight. Tonight, we take a different path through history, one that does not begin with kings or conquerors, nor end with monuments or empires. No swords, no banners, no shouts from the battlefield. Instead, we move gently into the everyday, into the quiet corners of ancient homes, the tucked-away places of routine, of habit,
of care. Tonight, we journey into the private, practical and peaceful world of toilets and bathing in the ancient
world. It may seem unusual, we rarely talk about these things, yet every civilization, no matter how grand or humble, found its own way to wash, to cleanse, to step aside from the dust and demands of daily life and return to a state of comfort. And as we wander through soft-lit rooms and shaded courtyards tonight, we'll begin to see how these simple acts of washing one's face, of drawing water, of emptying a pot, of sitting in the warmth of a public bath were so deeply human. Let's begin in the dim glow of an oil lamp. You are in a small mud brick home. The walls are cool to the touch. Outside, the streets of an ancient city, perhaps in Mesopotamia, are slowly waking to the sound of early footsteps and the low call of water sellers. Inside, a woman rises from a straw-filled bed. She lights a clay lamp with practiced fingers. Its flame flickers softly, casting golden shadows across the packed earth floor. She pours water from a jar into a simple basin and begins to wash. There is no glass mirror, no plastic bottles, no rush, just a cloth, a bowl, and a moment of peace. Across the ancient world, along the Nile, through the alleys of Rome, in the misty gardens of Kyoto, people performed similar mourning. Rituals, some with luxury, others with barely enough water for a rinse, but all with the same instinct to begin the day with a sense of renewal. In the great bathhouses of Rome, heat filled the air like a warm blanket. Candles glowed behind steam-streaked marble. Men and women moved from room to room, from the caldarium's thick embrace to the icy plunge of the frigidarium. Some came for health, others for gossip, many for no other reason than that it felt good to let the heat soak into their bones. These were not hurried places. The baths were temples of rest. In colder climates, wooden tubs were filled with steaming water near the hearth. A mother would bathe, first, then her daughter, then her sons. The same water, carefully used, the scent of pine and ash mingled with the sounds of wind outside and crackling fire within. Even the humble chamber pot tucked beneath beds or resting in dark corners played its quiet role in the story of human comfort. In the middle of a cold night, few things feel more precious than not having to step outside. The pot offered dignity, ease, and a return to warmth, with minimal interruption, and in the morning its contents were emptied into the earth, returning to the cycle of nature. In the Indus Valley we find systems astonishing in their foresight. Drains carved into brick foundations, sloped floors that carried water away without a word, toilets with covered channels, homes connected to community plumbing centuries before such things were invented in the modern West. These weren't places of
shame or secrecy. They were carefully built, tended, and respected. Water was precious. To have enough for
washing was a quiet luxury. In Egypt, oil and sand were used to clean the body. In Greece, athletes scraped their skin clean after exercise. In Babylon, soap was made from ash and animal fat, stirred in clay pots, cooled in the shade, and stored for the next cleansing. The idea of cleanliness was not just physical, it was emotional, even spiritual. In temples, before prayer or sacrifice, worshippers bathed. Priests washed their hands and feet in sacred basins. In some places, rivers became holy, water as purification, as rebirth. Bathing was not always about dirt. Sometimes it was about starting anew. And yet for all these rich customs, the rhythm remained slow, intentional, quiet. Whether in the public baths of Carthage, the stone latrines of Pompeii, or the forested springs of ancient Japan, people took their time. They paused, they breathed, they soaked in warmth and silence. That is the kind
of story we tell tonight. Not one of spectacle, but of serenity, of how our ancestors from all corners of the
world crafted peaceful rituals from necessity, how they transformed water, fire, and time into moments of stillness, how they designed spaces not just to cleanse the body, but to soothe the spirit. As you lie here now, warm and at rest, you are part of that same tradition. The end-of-day bath, the brushing of teeth, the dim light, the quiet room, a return to comfort before sleep. So let the flicker of an ancient lantern guide you now. Let the soft splash of water in a stone basin soothe your thoughts. Let the hush of footsteps in a bathhouse corridor lead you deeper into rest. The world is full of noise, but in these stories of toilets and bathing, of soap and silence, we rediscover the soft, slow pulse of human life. The gentle places where time slows, where the body is cared for, and where stillness takes root. Close your eyes. Let's begin. The world is still. It is early, not quite morning, not quite night. A soft grey light presses gently against the horizon, and the sky, though empty of sun, has begun to stir. There are no loud sounds, only a distant bird call, the hush of the wind brushing over clay rooftops, and the soft creak of wood as shutters are opened with care. In this quiet hour, a breath is drawn, slow and steady. Somewhere, in a mud-brick village along the banks of the Euphrates, a figure stirs beneath a woven blanket. The night has passed. Another day begins, not with ceremony or noise, but with silence, with routine, with a single act of care. A clay basin waits in the corner of the room, filled with water carried in a jar the evening before. It rests on a short stand beside a folded cloth, a sliver of soap made from ash, and a small bowl of perfumed oil. The room is simple. The air smells of earth and smoke. And in this quiet corner of history, the first act of the day is not work, but washing. We are in Mesopotamia, roughly 4,000 years ago. In the city of Ur, or perhaps one of its neighbors, people rise with the sun or just before it. The air is still cool from the night. The walls of their homes, made from sun-dried bricks, hold a dampness that will soon disappear beneath the weight of midday heat. This particular home is modest, but comfortable. A family of 5 lives here, 2 parents, their children, and an older grandmother who sleeps nearest the fire. The floor is packed dirt, covered in rush mats. A low ceiling beams above, held by wood, hauled in from faraway hills. At the far wall, a wide, flat stone acts as a hearth. Beside it, a niche carved into the wall holds small clay pots, each with a purpose. One contains oil, another fine sand for scrubbing. A third holds a herbal mixture, crushed and dried, used to scent the skin after cleansing. The clay basin sits at ankle height. It's shallow, round, and smooth inside from years of use. Water is precious here. The family uses it with care, sharing it, reheating it when possible, and never letting it go to waste. What little remains after washing is poured
outside into the dust, near the roots of the fig tree. As the sun begins to glow a pale orange, the mother of the
house wakes first. She lifts the clay lid of the basin, checks the water, and stirs it gently with her fingers. It's cool. She sets a small pot on the hearth, fills it with water, and waits for the faint steam to rise. She does not rush. There is time. When the water is warm, not hot, she pours it into the basin, mixing it with the cold water from last night. She dips her cloth in and wrings it out. With slow movements, she wipes her face, her neck, her arms. Not scrubbing, just touching, removing sleep, renewing herself. Next, she helps her youngest child wash. He is still sleepy but smiles as the cloth moves across his cheeks. Water, even in small amounts, is comforting. It signals a start, a breath, a return to life. Later, the older daughter will come to wash. She will comb her hair with a carved wooden comb. Rub a thin layer of oil onto her arms. Clean behind her ears. In a home like this, cleanliness is not about luxury. It is survival, it is habit, it is pride. In cities like and Babylon, cleanliness is
woven into the culture. People wash before meals, before prayers, before entering temples. Dirty water is
carried away in channels carved into the streets. Primitive drains, but functional. Some wealthier homes even have their own private latrines with sloped floors and clay-lined pipes that guide waste away from the living quarters. In the poorer parts of town, a shared pot might serve several families, emptied in the morning with care. But for bathing, nearly everyone shares the same ritual: a basin, a cloth, and a moment of peace. Outside, the city stirs. Merchants begin opening shutters. Children run barefoot on the cool stone. But inside, the ritual continues. The grandmother, slow to rise, is helped by her daughter. Her bones ache, but she smiles. She remembers the same routine from her own childhood. How her mother's hands guided hers. How the scent of lavender filled the air from a dried bundle hung in the corner. The same basin, perhaps. The same motions. The same warmth. This basin is not just a bowl of water. It is a moment of stillness in a world that even then was beginning to hurry. As cities grew and streets filled with carts and trade and smoke, there remained these early morning moments. Before the ovens were lit, before the animals were fed, before the sun rose high, where the act of washing remained sacred in its own quiet way. The tools are simple: a rough woven cloth, a piece of ash soap made from cooking fire residue and animal fat, a palmful of crushed herbs, thyme, rosemary, or mint, gathered from the edges of irrigation canals. Sometimes a flat stone is used to scrub away calluses, sometimes fine sand scooped from beside the riverbank. These are the forgotten tools of cleanliness, humble and handmade, yet deeply effective. Water is the true treasure. In this time, it does not come from a tap. It must be fetched, carried, in clay jars from community wells or drawn in buckets from narrow stairwells beside the home. In some places, aqueducts have begun to form. In others, small canals run along the edges of streets, carrying water from the fields. But still, each drop is earned. Each rinse is precious. To waste water is to risk comfort later. The youngest child, now fully awake, sits beside the basin and watches the steam rise from the last bit of warmed water. His sister teases him gently, tapping his nose with a damp cloth. The mother laughs. For a moment, nothing else
matters. The market can wait, the weaving can wait, the goats can wait. This is the soft heartbeat of the home.
The beginning. And as the day stretches forward, the basin will be emptied, cleaned and set aside. In some homes, the water is used again for the animals. In others, it is poured around the garden. Waste nothing, lose nothing. Evening will bring another round of washing, not just for cleanliness, but for coolness, for sleep, for calm. In wealthier homes, bathing becomes more elaborate. There are rooms set aside with stone basins, heated, floors, and attendants to pour water over the bather's head, but the core remains the same: the clay basin, the quiet, the care. In temples, ritual washing is practiced. Before prayers, hands and feet are rinsed. Before sacrifices, the body is purified. Water becomes more than cleaning. It becomes connection between body and earth, between person and God, between one day and the next. Even in death, water is part of the ritual. Bodies are washed gently, lovingly, and laid to rest with oil and cloth. The same basin perhaps used for both birth and burial, a circle, a rhythm, a language of water understood without words. And so we return to the room. The sun is higher now, the light more golden than grey. The basin is nearly empty. The cloth hangs over the side, drying slowly in the warmth of the hearth. The room is no longer quiet, but it is not noisy. Just full. Alive. Stiusi, day has begun. Soon the marketplace will ring with voices. The smell of baked bread will drift through the
alleys. The sound of pots clinking, of footsteps echoing in narrow lanes, of hammers on copper, of merchants
calling their prices. This will all come, but it began here. In this corner, in this small act of washing a face, of dipping a cloth, of sharing a moment. In every age, in every culture, there is this same ritual, whether with streams or sinks, with ash, soap or liquid shampoo. We begin our days by facing ourselves, by rinsing sleep from
our skin, by greeting the world with something clean, something soft, something quiet. And so as we leave this
home and step softly out into the warming streets of ancient Mesopotamia, we carry with us the peace of that clay basin, that moment of stillness, that morning breath. The water may be gone, the basin may be dry, but its
memory lingers like dew, like light, like love. Let us carry it into our dreams.
The sun has barely lifted itself over the terracotta rooftops of Pompeii. Shadows stretch long across the narrow streets where stone pavers still carry the scars of cartwheels long worn into their surface. In the quiet of early morning, a different kind of story is unfolding, a tale not of temples or politics, but of what lies beneath and behind, of what is thrown away and forgotten. This is the chapter of Pompeii most people avoid thinking about, the waste. Yet, in its waste, Pompeii tells us who its people truly were. As a city of nearly 11,000 inhabitants, Pompeii produced an astonishing amount of human, animal, and household waste. And in a place without modern plumbing or public sanitation systems, that waste had to go somewhere. The Romans, to their credit, were problem solvers. What they lacked in today's technology, they made up for with a network of clever, though imperfect, solutions. To understand Pompeii's waste, one must first understand its streets. The city's roads were intentionally raised with high pavements flanking deep-set stone pathways. These weren't just for Walking, they were also designed as open sewers. Between the paving stones ran trenches and channels that allowed rainwater and waste to flow downhill away from homes and shops. The stepping stones placed at regular intervals allowed pedestrians to cross without soiling their sandals, but during heavy rains, the streets transformed into torrents of refuse-laden water, sweeping down the sloped cityscape. It's a strange thought. The same roads that led to temples and markets also carried the city's filth, but not all waste was washed away. Much of it was simply tossed. Household scraps, rotten vegetables, animal bones, broken pottery were routinely thrown into nearby alleyways or even into the street. Archaeologists have found layers of compacted debris built up in doorways and corners, forming a kind of historical sediment of daily life. The outer walls of homes bore the grime of decades. Many people, especially the poor, lived in close proximity to this decay, enduring the foul smells and the buzzing of flies as part of their daily experience. Inside homes, however, the management of waste was a bit more refined, at least for those who could afford it. Wealthy households sometimes had rudimentary latrines, small stone or wooden seats with a hole, often situated over a cesspit. These were often located near the kitchen, an arrangement that seems strange to us now, but was practical for the plumbing they had. The waste would collect in a pit, which would eventually need to be emptied, an unpleasant job, often left to slaves or the lowest-ranking workers. In public spaces, communal latrines provided some relief. These were often located near the baths or markets and could accommodate several people at once. Built with stone seats, lined up over a flowing water channel, they offered a continuous rinse system powered by aqueduct-fed water. Men and women would enter, sit side by side, and use a sponge on a stick called a tussorium, which would be rinsed in a communal bucket after use. It's a detail that raises modern eyebrows, but in the context of Roman sanitation, it was considered functional and even hygienic. What happened to the contents of cesspits and street gutters? In many cases, it was collected. Human waste, especially urine, was a valuable commodity. Fullers, those who cleaned and processed wool, used urine for its ammonia content to whiten and soften fabrics. Collection pots were placed at intersections, and passers-by were encouraged to contribute. These pots were then gathered and taken to fulling workshops. It's a strange circle, the waste of the people cleaning the clothes of the people. Animal waste was likewise collected, either for agricultural use or burned as fuel. Nothing went truly unused. Even broken pottery shards might be repurposed to scrape cooking pots or to patch broken walls. Waste in Pompeii was not just an inconvenience, it was a part of the economic engine. Those who managed it had
roles to play, even if those roles were hidden in shadow. Some of the most telling evidence comes not from
within the city walls, but from its outskirts. Pompeii's dumps, open areas outside the gates, reveal mounds of refuse, much of it layered with carelessness, but some arranged with purpose. Here, archaeologists have found not only broken items and organic debris, but also clues about trade, consumption, and class. Imported amphorae, animal bones from lavish meals, and the remains of discarded tools all whisper stories of who owned what, who ate what, and who threw what away. The management of waste was deeply social. The elite could afford to keep their homes relatively clean, employing slaves to carry waste away. The poor, crammed into upper floors or tight insulae apartments, had fewer options. Many likely used chamber pots that were emptied into the street. The result was a daily struggle to maintain some semblance of cleanliness in a city where the infrastructure could only do so much. Yet, Pompeii was not alone in this struggle. Across the Roman Empire, cities dealt with similar challenges, and Pompeii's solutions, its raised streets, its stepped crossings, its use of waste as resource stand as evidence of both ingenuity and limitation. It reminds us that ancient people lived not in postcard perfection, but in the gritty reality of daily maintenance. Even in the city's moment of destruction, waste tells its story. In the layers of ash that covered Pompeii, archaeologists have found cesspits still half full, interrupted in their cycle of emptying, latrines frozen mid-use, streets where the flow of water had ceased, and the final layer of refuse lay just beneath the volcanic dust. It's a haunting reminder that life ended not in cinematic tragedy, but in the mundane acts of a normal day. There is a kind of intimacy in studying ancient waste. It is not glamorous, it is not the story of emperors or battles, but it is a human story. It is the story of what we eat, what we throw away, what we try to hide. It is the story of how we manage discomfort and decay. And perhaps most importantly, it is a story of how civilization in all its splendor is built upon a constant, unspoken effort to keep things clean. When we walk the streets of Pompeii today, we may marvel at its artistry, its architecture, its preservation. But beneath our feet, under the polished stone, lies another Pompeii, less visible, less celebrated, but just as real. It is a Pompeii of smells and labor, of buckets and brooms, of broken pots and buzzing flies. It is a city that reminds us that the past was not made of marble alone. It was made of dirt, too. As the day begins to warm and the markets start to stir, another cart rumbles down the Via dell'Abbondanza. Behind, it trails a stain of water and waste, a thin line that tells us the city is alive. For now, because here in Pompeii,
even the waste has a place in history. You leave behind the dusty streets and quiet alleyways of Pompeii and approach a building that hums softly with
life. The sun hangs low in the sky, its warmth paling in comparison to the glow that spills from the grand arched doorway ahead. This is no temple, no merchant's hall, and no noble villa. This is something far more communal, far more democratic, a place where time slows and the senses awaken. This is the bathhouse. In Latin they call it thermae. And here the Roman world reveals one of its gentlest, most sophisticated treasures. From the outside, it looks unassuming. Stone walls kissed by centuries of sun, intricate mosaics barely visible from the entry, and a faint plume of steam rising above the roofline. But once you step inside, the world shifts. The air is warm, soft and thick with the scent of oils and heated stone. You are not alone. Voices echo lightly in the distance. Soft. Conversations, laughter, splashes of water, and for a moment it feels like stepping into a dream, one that has welcomed generations before you. The baths were not simply about cleaning the body. No, they were about cleaning the mind, about community, about ritual, about rhythm. And as you walk deeper into the space, guided by the gentle light of oil lamps dancing against the walls, you begin to understand how deeply these rituals were woven into the Roman soul. You begin in the apoditerium, the changing room. Benches line the walls, niches carved into the stone hold garments neatly folded, some rich and vibrant, others simple and worn. Here, a young man carefully unlaces his sandals, his tunic falling softly to the floor. Across from him, an older merchant tucks a coin purse into a cubbyhole and wraps himself in a light woolen cloth. Slaves and attendants mill about, helping their masters undress, some oiling the skin in preparation for what's to come. There's an intimacy to this space, but not the kind that isolates. It unites, for here, senators and stonemasons bathe side by side. Age, status, profession, all fade behind the fog of steam and the touch of warm water. In this space, all are Roman. All are equal. And all are here to experience the same cleansing fire of the baths. From the changing room, you step into the tepidarium, the warm room. It is a place of transition, like twilight, between day and night. The air is pleasant, just enough heat to loosen the body, and the marble beneath your feet feels smooth and alive with warmth. Here, bathers recline on benches, letting the heat gently coax the tension from their limbs. The floor has been heated by fires stoked beneath the building, an ingenious system of hypocausts that channels warmth upward through the walls and floors. In this quiet heat, your skin begins to glisten, muscles soften, breath slows, and for a while you simply sit. Around you, others do the same. Some talk softly, perhaps about politics or the gladiator match scheduled for the next day. Others close their eyes, adrift in the stillness. The room feels like a shared heartbeat, a pulse of peace that ties everyone together in silence. And then, when the body is ready, you move deeper still into the caldarium, the hot room. At first, the heat is staggering. It hits like a wave, humid, intense, unforgiving. But once you step in, it wraps around you like an embrace. Yeah, the room glows, light flickering on the high, arched ceiling. A large pool of steaming water waits at the center, its surface dancing with ripples. You lower yourself in slowly, inch by inch, the heat seeping into your bones. Here, time feels suspended. The water cradles you. The warmth strips away weariness. Around you, bathers anoint their skin with olive oil, massaging it in slow circles before scraping it away with a curved metal tool called a strigil. This ritual strigiling is both cleansing and sacred. Dirt and dead skin come away with the oil, leaving the body polished, refreshed. The caldarium is not just for washing, it is for transformation. Many Romans believe the heat chases illness from the body, clears the lungs, revives the blood. And in this space where the world outside cannot reach, you feel those beliefs begin to make sense. The room smells of warmed oil, eucalyptus,
and earth. Muffled voices echo through the steam. A philosopher speaks softly to a student in the corner, quoting
Virgil between scoops of water. A retired centurion leans against the pool's edge, his scarred hands resting on his
knees. A slave rubs his master's back with firm, practiced strokes, all of them together in the same space.
Separate lives, one ritual. When the heat becomes too much, you rise, your skin flushed and radiant, and pass once more through the tepidarium before reaching the frigidarium, the cold room. This too is part of the
Roman rhythm. As much as they cherish heat, they respect its opposite. The moment you plunge into the chilled
pool, your body recoils, then awakens. Blood races, the heart stirs, the world sharpens. You breathe deeply. Life
rushes back in. This is rebirth. From cold to warm to hot to cold again. A cycle of renewal that has been
repeated in these walls for decades, perhaps centuries. The frigidarium is quiet, almost reverent. Here, the ceremony ends and something new begins. Clarity, energy, light. Some bathers linger. Others, wrapped in towels, make their way to the massage rooms, or the small library tucked behind the portico, or the garden. Beyond, where columns frame a courtyard filled with soft grass and citrus trees, it's not unusual to spend hours
in the baths, sometimes an entire day. And why not? It is as much social as it is spiritual. It is where friendships
Are built, deals are struck, wisdom is shared. Outside, life continues, markets bustle, carts rattle along stone, streets, and the sun inches across the sky. But within these walls, the world moves differently. Here, water and air, heat replace ambition and noise, and the soul, weighed down by the burdens of the city, floats a little lighter. As distant, you walk once more through the apoditerium, dressed now in clean linen and soft sandals. You feel changed. Not just cleaner, but calmer, more present. The chatter of the bathhouse fades behind you as you step into the light of afternoon. The scent of olive oil still lingers on your skin. Your limbs are loose, your mind steady. For a
few precious hours, you were part of something ancient, something human, something eternal. In the days to
come, the bathhouse will remain. Fires will be stoked, water drawn, floors swept, and generation after, generation will pass through these doors to feel the same warmth, to share the same silence, to be touched by the same soft embrace of Roman life. The Romans understood something we sometimes forget, that to care for the body is to care for the soul. And within these stone walls, surrounded by heat and history, that truth becomes as clear as water. As the sun slipped behind the hills of Latium, the Roman countryside fell into a hush. Shadows stretched long across the fields, and the chatter of birds quieted to the occasional rustle of feathers. Within the modest home of a Roman farmer, the flickering flame of a single oil lamp lit the walls in amber. And there, in the quiet of the evening, a small but essential part of life waited in the corner, the vase nocturnum, or nighttime pot. It was simple. Terracotta or clay, worn smooth by years of use, often tucked beneath the bed or placed beside the doorway. It didn't have the sophistication of Rome's public latrines or the engineered flow of aqueduct-fed sewers. But in a rural farmhouse, far from the city's grandeur, the nighttime pot was a symbol of necessity, of privacy, of enduring rural pragmatism. For the Roman farmer, his day began before dawn and ended not long
after dusk. Every ounce of energy was spent tilling soil, guiding oxen, repairing fences, and ensuring that his
family and slaves were fed. By the time evening fell, his body ached. He didn't walk out into the night to the far-off outhouse, if such a structure even existed. Instead, the nighttime pot awaited quietly, humble, but always present. In truth, Roman ideas of sanitation were complex and inconsistent. The city dwellers, especially the elite, valued their public baths, their marble latrines with shared sponges, and their sewer systems like the cloaca maxima. But in the countryside, practicality trumped pride. You didn't parade your bodily functions or disguise them in elaborate plumbing. You found a quiet place, a corner, a field, or when night had come and the world had gone to sleep, you used the pot. Children especially grew up familiar with its use. There was no shame in it. The pot was explained to them as soon as they could sit steadily. Better inside than fumbling in the dark, a grandmother might say with a knowing nod, folding her arms in her linen tunic. Indeed, darkness in the countryside held its dangers: snakes, stray dogs, thieves, and even wolves in colder months.
No one wanted to
step outside and risk a twisted ankle or worse. And so the nighttime pot was not just a convenience, it was safety. When a family had guests, a secondary pot might be offered, or the guest might be told quietly, "It's there, by the back wall." There was no embarrassment. Bodily needs were universal, and among the peasantry there was no point in hiding them. Even the gods knew of such things. Ceres, goddess of agriculture, watched over the sea fields and those who worked them. Surely she wouldn't mind a bit of practicality when nightfall came. In the colder months, the pot was a blessing. Wrapped in heavy woolen tunics and thick blankets, the farmer would not want to venture into frosted grass or biting winds just to relieve himself. His breath already steamed in the lamplight as he prepared for bed. Using the pot was a quick, quiet affair. A small cloth might be used afterward, or a rag soaked and hung to dry for the next day. Water was precious in some parts, and cleanliness was done with what little one could spare. In larger farmsteads, especially those worked by several slave families or extended kin, there might be multiple pots, kept in different corners, or even in a designated shed if one were lucky enough to afford it. The women would often be the ones to empty the pots in the morning, carrying them carefully to a patch of field away from the crops or dumping them in a trench. Urine was often saved, not discarded, for it had many uses. Mixed with ash, it became a cleaning agent, used in tanning leather. Even launderers in the cities collected it for bleaching tunics. But in the quiet moments of the night, those practical concerns faded. The pot sat in the corner as the house settled into sleep. The fire in the hearth, once lively with flame, became a glowing cradle of embers. The wind brushed against wooden shutters. Insects hummed their nighttime songs, and the stars, so brilliant without city smoke to hide them, blinked above. Perhaps a child stirred, whispering to his mother that he needed to go. She would guide him, half asleep herself, setting the pot beside his little cot. The clay felt cool to the touch. The boy relieved himself, wiped with a scrap of cloth, and lay back down, safe and warm. In that simple ritual there was comfort, continuity, a reminder that even in an empire as vast as Rome, with its legions, temples and Caesars, life still boiled down to these small, shared moments. Some homes scented their pots with herbs, a sprig of rosemary tucked nearby, a handful of dried
lavender or thyme. Not for vanity, but to soften the smell that would inevitably rise by morning. These weren't
perfumes, they were practical. Any farmer knew that a foul odor could attract flies, and flies meant illness. So cleanliness mattered even in the dark. In wealthier rural homes, the nighttime pot might have a lid, maybe even one carved or painted, a sign of status, yes, but also of mindfulness. Everything in a Roman home, no matter how humble or grand, was crafted to last. The pot was not discarded after a season, it was cared for, scrubbed with sand, dried in the sun, kept nearby because it was trusted, like the sickle, like the plough, like the oil lamp, and when dawn came and the rooster crowed, the household stirred again. The pot was emptied, washed, set in its place, forgotten until the stars returned. Yet even in its silence, the nighttime pot had witnessed everything. The whispered secrets of lovers too shy to speak in daylight, the murmured prayers of a widow asking for good harvests, the quiet weeping of a slave mourning a lost child, the coughs of an aging grandfather, the soft songs of a mother lulling her baby to sleep. In a world dominated by emperors and gods, by wars and triumphal arches, by marble and gold, the pot was clay, earth, real. And perhaps that was its quiet power. It reminded the Roman farmer that life was not just lived in daylight and deeds, but also in the quiet needs of the night. So much of history forgets these details. The armor, the politics, the conquests, they take center stage. But life itself was
made in the small things, in the care taken to place a pot by the bed, in the trust
that it would be there in the darkness, in the rituals that, though unspoken, made up the rhythm of every day. And as the farmer closed his eyes, wrapped in his blanket of woven wool, the wind sighing gently through the thatch above, he knew the pot was there, in its place, waiting, just as it always had, and would again tomorrow. Before the world knew soap in bars, bubbles or bottles, there was oil, and sand, and herbs ground between stones. In the soft light of ancient homes and bathhouses where water was precious and fire was sacred, people sought cleanliness through gentler means drawn from the earth itself. Imagine an early morning along the Nile. The air is warm but not yet hot. A gentle breeze passes through the reeds. In a whitewashed courtyard of an Egyptian villa, a woman sits cross-legged on a woven mat. She holds a small alabaster jar in her hands. Inside is a pale golden oil, fragrant with myrrh, lotus blossom, and a hint of cinnamon. This is not just oil. This is ritual. This is luxury. And this is cleanliness. With practiced fingers, she dips into the jar and warms the oil. Between her palms, she rubs it slowly into her skin, from shoulder to wrist, from ankle to hip. The scent rises with the sun. A slave girl waits nearby, holding a curved bronze scraper. When the oil has soaked and loosened the dust of yesterday, she steps forward. With careful pressure, she scrapes downward, drawing away the oil and all that clings to it. Dead skin, old sweat, the invisible weariness of living in a dry, hot world. It all slips away with each sweep. Her skin glows in the morning light. Not from soap, not from water, but from oil, warmth,
and the ancient art of anointing. This was the elite way in Egypt. Oils were more than cosmetic. They softened.
Skin scorched by the sun, they masked the ever-present smell of smoke and labor, and they served a spiritual purpose too, offering the body to the gods in a state of grace. Nearby, a boy trains for a foot race. He is barefoot, lean and quick. But before he begins, he too reaches for a jar of oil. This one is simpler, perhaps castor or olive oil mixed with a cooling resin. He coats his limbs, his chest, even his scalp. His skin gleams, protected from sun and friction. After training, he will head to the bathhouse, and there he will repeat the same ritual: rub, scrape, rinse, rest. In ancient Greece, this cycle was a daily rhythm. Athletes, philosophers,
merchants each had their version of this oily baptism. The strigil, a curved scraper of bronze or bone, was as
common as a comb. It rested beside basins and hung on walls. You would see men rubbing oil into their muscles before a workout, then gathering in steamy bathhouses to scrape it off afterward. There was a kind of fellowship in it, a shared vulnerability. The oil was not only cleansing, it was a kind of armor against the roughness of the day. But what of those who had no access to oils? What of the poor, the farmers, the shepherds on hillsides, far from city baths? They too cleansed in their own way. Picture a man in Mesopotamia. He stands near a shallow riverbank at dusk. In his hand is a small pouch of fine, dry sand. The water here is silty, warm from the sun. He steps into it slowly, letting it rise to his knees. Then, kneeling in the shallows, he dips his hand into the pouch and begins to rub. Sand on skin, it sounds harsh, but it isn't. Not if it's fine and used gently. The friction lifts. Dirt from the skin's surface. It scrubs away grease, sweat, even old calluses. He rinses, rubs again, then rinses. Once more. When he stands, the river carries away what no longer belongs to him. He dries in the wind, clean in his own way. In India, women in ancient times often used mixtures of crushed herbs, neem, turmeric, sandalwood, and even chickpea flour to wash. These weren't just practical, they were Ayurvedic, believed to balance the body's energies. A bride might spend days before her wedding in ritual baths, scrubbed by female relatives with turmeric paste and scented oils. It wasn't about cleanliness alone, it was about transformation. In Rome too, the oil tradition thrived. The Romans loved their bathhouses, yes, but oil was the first step. Before plunging into hot water, a bather would be rubbed with oil, often by a slave or attendant. Then came the strigil. Then, and only then, the plunge into steam or cold or hot water. And yet, in many places, water remained scarce. In desert cultures, dry cleansing became an art form. Ashes from burned palm leaves, powdered clay, even fragrant dusts like those made from crushed rose petals and camphor. These were not the products of poverty, but of adaptation. In dry lands, you honored the skin by respecting its need for oil, for exfoliation, for shade and cool cloth. There's a quiet dignity in this kind of cleansing. No froth, no artificial scent, no rushing. Each step is deliberate. Rub, wait, scrape, rinse, dry, rest. And afterward, a lightness, as if the body has been reset. Even today, echoes remain. In Turkish hammams, you can still find attendants who lather and scrape. In Japanese bathhouses, people still scrub gently before entering shared baths, though now with soap and washcloth, not sand and oil. In India, besan and turmeric are still sold as skin treatments. In Africa, black soap made from ash and oil still holds a place of honor. But in the old ways, there was something more, a kind of intimacy with the body. You had to touch your skin, feel where it was rough or soft. You had to wait for the oil to warm. You had to sit still for the scraping. These moments weren't rushed. They weren't hidden behind shower curtains or hurried in gym stalls. They were part of the day, part of living. Children learned by watching, a mother rubbing
oil into her daughter's arms, a father scraping sand gently from his son's back. These were lessons not just in
cleanliness, but in care, in being present, in treating the body with reverence. And perhaps, more than anything, these rituals offered a kind of pause. In a world full of labor, dust, sweat, and noise, the moment of cleansing was quiet. Even in the crowded bathhouses, even in the noisy riverside spots, there was a hush to the act of rubbing oil into skin. It was a reminder that the body deserved rest, that even the busiest life needs moments of grace. Close your eyes now and imagine it. A bowl of warm oil beside you. The scent of cedar or clove rising gently. The feel of smooth hands rubbing tension from your neck and shoulders. The scrape of bronze across your back, then a basin of water, a cloth, soft and worn, a breeze through the open window. You are clean now, not because of chemicals or hot jets of water, but because you stopped, you listened to your body, and you gave it the care it asked for. So when we think of hygiene in the ancient world, let us not imagine filth or ignorance. Let us remember the elegance of these rituals, the kindness in them, the wisdom. Oil instead of soap, sand
instead of scrubbers, hands instead of machines, and always, always the stillness that followed. In the end,
whether through oil or sand, ash or herb, ancient people achieved what we all still seek, not just cleanliness, but peace. a moment where the day falls away, where the skin is cool and smooth, and where the body, no longer burdened, can breathe freely again. The morning mist has not yet lifted when the sound of rope creaking against stone breaks the silence. In a quiet Roman village nestled between gentle hills and fields of swaying barley, a well stands at the heart of daily life. This is not a grand aqueduct or a triumph of Roman engineering meant for the eyes of emperors. This is simpler, older, a circular stone structure worn smooth by many hands. Its rim is cool and damp, and its shadow stretches long in the soft gold of early morning. Here begins the silent rhythm of gathering water, the first act of many in a Roman day. The well is not just a hole in the ground, it is a lifeline. Dug deep into the earth, its walls are lined with stone to prevent collapse. At its base, fresh water gathers from underground springs, fed by the ancient aquifers of the Italian countryside. Some wells are shallow, just a few meters deep. Others plunge downward 20 or 30 meters into the dark earth, where water waits in stillness. Above, a wooden frame supports the pulley, a simple mechanism, but dependable. A rope winds down, bearing a clay bucket, perhaps hand-shaped by someone long forgotten. A woman lowers it slowly, the rope rubbing between her palms. She listens, waits, and then hears it, the splash of water deep below. She smiles softly. The day has truly begun. Each household in the village relies on the well. There are no kitchen taps, no running water. To bathe, to cook, to wash, water must be fetched first. It is often the task of women and young girls, and though it seems simple, it is a practice steeped in patience and quiet strength. The clay amphora they carry is not light and filled with water. It presses against the curve of the hip or rests atop the head, balanced by years of practice. The walk from the well to the home is familiar, worn smooth by countless feet. It is a path made not of stone, but of routine. A path as intimate as the homes it leads to. At the well, moments unfold gently. It becomes a place of small conversations and shared silences. Children trail behind their mothers, watching frogs at the well's edge or playing with dust and pebbles. Older women offer advice, sometimes without being asked. A whispered blessing, a murmured worry about a coming storm. These things are exchanged with as much care as the water itself. The well is both a physical and emotional center where the village breathes and speaks, yet not all wells are found in villages. In the countryside, a solitary farmhouse might have its own well, dug long ago by the hands of ancestors. These wells are deeper, sometimes dangerous. The bucket creaks slowly upward, water sloshing gently inside, while a boy peers down, curious but afraid. Such wells are maintained carefully, for a collapse would mean ruin. A dry well, too, is a curse. The spring fails or the water runs low, the house must look to neighbors or journey far to find a stream. Water is precious. Every drop carried home is a small act of survival. In Roman towns and cities, public wells dot the neighborhoods. Though aqueducts bring water to many places, not every street is blessed with a fountain or bathhouse. For poorer families and those living at the margins, the well remains essential. Near tenements and insular, small communal wells serve hundreds. They are noisier, places filled with the clamor of many hands. Yet still, even here, there is a rhythm, a shared understanding of waiting, of fetching, of carrying. The city moves fast, but the well moves slow. It invites even the busiest soul to pause. There is something deeply human about drawing water. It connects the body to the earth, the hand to the element. In Rome, water is seen as more than necessity. It is sacred. Nymphs are believed to guard springs, and some wells are honored with small offerings. A flower, a coin, a whispered word. These customs linger from older times when water was life and magic, both. The well becomes a place not only of labor, but of quiet, reverence. Back in the countryside, the sun climbs higher. A second visit to the well may come before noon, especially in summer. Washing must be done, cloth needs soaking, the olive trees must be tended, and workers will want a cool drink. A younger brother takes the bucket this time, eager to prove he is strong enough. His steps are careful, his grip tight. When he returns, he is beaming, proud of his small burden. His mother tousles his hair and pours a little into a cup. They share it without a word. Inside the home, the water is stored in large jars, kept cool in shaded corners. It is poured by hand, rationed by habit. A cup for the father after his work. A
ladle for washing the baby. A little saved for the evening meal. Nothing is wasted, even the water used for
washing is poured into the garden or used to clean the floors. Water does not flow freely here. It is earned, carried, respected. The people of Rome may build grand aqueducts, but in the home, the well is king. Sometimes the well goes quiet. A storm floods it and the water tastes strange. A drought dries it and the bucket
hits mud. Then the family worries. Eyes turn to the sky, to the ground, to the gods. Prayers are offered. A priest may visit.
The well becomes a place of fear, but most days it simply waits, calm and deep and ancient. Stone circle, a rope, a bucket, and a need. As dusk falls, the final trip is made. The sun sets behind the hills, and the shadows lengthen. The well reflects the sky now, a dark mirror to the fading light. The village grows quiet, save for the footsteps of one last figure walking the path. The bucket dips one more time, the splash echoes, faintly. And then the rope rises, slowly, steadily, the well yields its gift once more. In the silence of night, when the fires are low and sleep settles like dust, the well remains. It waits in darkness, cool and patient. It has no door to lock, no guard to keep watch. And yet, it is never truly alone, for tomorrow, as always, someone will come. They will step into the soft morning light, place their hands on the rope and begin again. Water from the well, simple, ancient, quiet. It is not the most glorious story Rome has to offer. No conquests, no emperors, no triumphs, but it is one of the most human, a story of need and care, of routine and connection, a story of how even the smallest acts, pulling a bucket from the dark, shape the rhythm of life. In the hush of ancient mornings, before the buzz of labor and life resumed its daily rhythm, the drains beneath, the waking cities stirred with quiet purpose. The surface world above was noisy with markets, sandals on, cobbles, pots clinking and voices calling out. But beneath it all, a different world moved slowly and constantly, dark, damp, and essential. In this chapter, we descend beneath the streets of history into the gentle mystery of ancient drainage systems, forgotten by time and hidden from sight. These passages once carried away the traces of human life, not just waste, but stories, forgotten routines, and the invisible work of civilization. Long before the hum of modern plumbing, human societies had already begun solving the oldest problem that came with living together in large numbers where everything went after it was used, waste, water, runoff, and rain all had to be moved away safely and silently. The drain was not merely a pipe or a hole in the ground, it was an
idea, an understanding. It said, this must go elsewhere. This must leave us, but not disturb us. And so from clay,
gutters to stone tunnels, from sloped floors to slotted grates, drains were born not from glamour, but from the deep instinct to protect health, space, and dignity. In ancient Mesopotamia, some of the earliest known drainage systems were carved from baked clay and laid beneath the homes of Ur and Babylon. Here, archaeologists have uncovered narrow channels that once guided wastewater from kitchens and latrines into larger canals. They were not grand constructions, but they were deliberate, proof of a people who understood that the unseen was just
as important as the visible.
These drains whispered of organization, of thoughtfulness, of quiet engineering. Travel westward in time and terrain, and we find ourselves in the stone embrace of ancient Rome. The Romans, with their flair for infrastructure, built drains that rival some modern systems in design. The Cloaca Maxima, Rome's Great Drain, remains one of the oldest functioning drainage systems in the world. Originally an open canal, it was later enclosed and expanded, a deep vaulted tunnel of stone that moved the waste of an empire. Yet, the cloaca was not alone. All across Roman towns, smaller drains ran beneath bathhouses, fountains, and public toilets. Rainwater and waste alike were guided outwards, often merging into larger sewers that spilled eventually into the Tiber or the sea. In these ancient drains, water did the heavy lifting. Roman engineers understood gradients and gravity. Their roads sloped gently toward the center. Their floors tipped toward the edges. Their tiles were laid with the careful hand of someone who knew that even the smallest incline mattered. Water was not forced to move, it was invited. With a little slope and a guiding wall, it would go where it was needed, or rather, where it was no longer needed. But Rome was not the only culture to master this quiet art. In the Harappan cities of the Indus Valley, long before Caesar ever walked in sandals, urban planners had already laid out intricate grids of homes with connected drainage systems. Each home had a private bathroom linked to covered drains that lined the streets. These drains had inspection holes and were built with removable bricks, making them easy to clean. It was a cleanliness born not from modern science, but from an intuitive respect for the body and the community. A drain wasn't just for the house, it was for the street, for the neighbor, for the village. Even in ancient Greece, where public latrines were common, drains often ran under the marble benches. Waste was washed away by running water, guided through narrow channels that threaded beneath the stone. In some wealthier homes, rainwater collected from the roof would be redirected through the property, washing floors and flushing latrines before vanishing into the earth beyond. The drain became a bridge between private and public life, a quiet servant keeping order without recognition. There is something meditative about the idea
of a drain. It is the gentle removal of the unwanted.
It does not shout or fight. It carries away quietly, making space for new things. In a world so focused on what we build and celebrate, the drain teaches a different lesson. That removal too is an act of care. That absence can be a kind of offering. That making clean is not just about scrubbing, but about letting go. And yet, despite their importance, drains were rarely written about. They were not carved into poetry or praised in ceremony. They were expected, used, forgotten. Only in their failure, when blockages brought floods or foul smells, did people remember their presence. But when they worked, they disappeared. perfect function was invisible, and so they became the unsung veins of cities pulsing beneath, feet carrying waste into the earth's embrace. Imagine walking through an ancient city just after a rain. The stones are wet, the air cool, the scent of soil rising. Beneath your sandals, water trickles unseen. It slides down. Rooftops, slips through gutters, drips into channels, and disappears. You do not see the drain, but you trust it. You know it is there beneath the stones, guiding the water away. In this moment, the city breathes not just through its people or its temples, but through these quiet arteries beneath. In rural villages, too, drainage existed. Less formal, perhaps, but no less thoughtful. Mud walls were built with slopes, channels were dug with hands, and hope. Even the simplest homes understood the value of moving waste away from the living space. In some places, plants were grown near the drain, using the runoff to bloom. Nature and need held hands. There is something deeply human in this effort. We may think of the drain as mechanical, but it is intimate. It touches what we leave behind. It knows the part of us we hide. It deals with what we cannot carry, and in doing so, it holds our most humble truths. In every culture, the drain was not just a structure, it was a promise that our living would not undo us, that our waste would not drown us, that even in filth there could be order. As the sun sets over an ancient street, the drains continue their work. Water trickles into the darkness, pulled by slope and stone. A child pours out the last of a basin. A woman rinses a cloth. A man empties a clay chamber pot. The sounds are small, the moments ordinary, but together they are part of a larger story about cleanliness, of care, of systems built not for glory, but for goodness. When night fully falls, and silence blankets the homes above, the drains remain awake. They do not sleep. They do not stop. Through darkness and stillness, they carry on, silent stewards of civilization. And tomorrow, when the roosters call and the markets stir and the world begins,
again they will be ready, still waiting, still flowing, still unseen. And so we end this chapter not with fanfare,
but with respect, a quiet nod to the quiet drain. It may not sparkle or roar, but it moves through time, steady and faithful. In the grand story of human progress, it is the humble details that hold everything together. And beneath every empire, every village, every bath and palace and hut, there is always a path for the water to leave, and in that leaving, to make life possible once more. The world changes when the sun sets. In ancient Rome, the same streets that rang with the calls of merchant and the creak of carts fell into a softer hush as twilight deepened. Shadows stretched across stone courtyards. The warm light of oil lamps flickered against mosaic walls. In this quiet hour, long after the bustle of the Forum had faded, another kind of life began to stir, gentle, slow, private. It was time for a bath. Not the kind taken during the day in the crowded thermae, but something more intimate, a cleansing beneath the stars, a bath by moonlight. The Romans were not strangers to ritual, nor were they a people who feared the night. Their cities glowed with lamplight, their homes protected by gods of the hearth, and so it was that many found comfort in bathing after dark. This was not merely for cleanliness, but for the soul, a soft end to the day, a warmth to carry into sleep. Step with me now into a private Roman domus, one tucked away from the main roads. The door has been bolted. The servants have finished their tasks. The family dines in low voices, and a hush lies upon the rooms, but in a chamber to the side, walled with fine brick, warmed by a hypocaust beneath the floor, the bath is being prepared. The air is thick with steam. A copper cauldron bubbles gently over a glowing brazier. A scent of lavender oil lingers, faint but lovely. Moonlight slants in through a high, narrow window. The light catches the edge of the bath, a shallow stone basin, rounded and smooth from years of use. Water glistens inside, dark as
polished obsidian. It reflects the stars above, faint pinpricks beyond the clouds of steam. Bathing in the Roman
world was rarely done alone, but the nighttime bath held a different spirit. It was quieter, slower, less social, more spiritual, a way to draw the day to a close, to rinse off its burdens. Some bathed with a lover, others alone. Some prayed first to Venus or Apollo, whispering thanks for another day survived. One can imagine the soft splash as a barefoot touches the water, the quiet intake of breath as warmth envelops the body. The stone is cool to the touch, but the water is like an embrace, a shell of calm. The noise of the world slips away. In the darkness, the sense of touch grows sharper. A linen cloth folded on a stool, a flask of oil slightly warmed, a dirham strigil curved and elegant, resting beside a candle. These tools of bathing were both common and cherished. They belonged to everyone, from the slave to the senator. They made up a ritual older than memory. And it wasn't just about the body. The Romans believed that water had the power to soothe the spirit, that the act of bathing could wash away more than sweat or dust. It could cleanse sorrow, silence anger, bring sleep to a
restless mind. Even the gods bathed, so said the poets. And if immortals sought the comfort of water, why not
mortals too? Not all baths were the same. In villas far from the city, wealthy landowners had private balneum rooms, smaller and more secluded than public baths. These chambers often opened into garden courtyards, where moonlight played upon marble statues and trickling fountains. In such places, one could bathe beneath the open sky. Crickets chirped softly. Night birds stirred in the trees. The water gleamed silver under the moon's watchful eye. In towns and cities, some preferred to visit the baths late in the evening, just before they closed. These final hours were often quiet, the crowds thinned, the air cooler. The caldarium still steamed, but the voices were hushed. Attendants moved like shadows, pouring water or fetching towels. There was peace in these hours, a shared stillness. The night bath could also be practical. For laborers who worked from dawn until dusk, evening was their only chance to bathe. For those who could not afford the leisure of midday visits to the thermae, the twilight offered a moment of dignity. And for the elderly whose joints ached more with each season, the warm water at day's end brought relief that was nearly holy. Yet there was something else too, something harder to name. The moonlight gave the bath a different kind of beauty, one not seen in the brightness of day. Shadows danced on tiled walls, steam curled like smoke from a priest's censer. The body itself seemed transformed, not exposed, but softened. Human, yes, but also something more timeless, a form wrapped in silence, adrift in warmth. The Romans understood this mystery. They might not have spoken of it directly, but their art hints at it. In frescoes, bathers are often painted not in daylight, but in gentle gloom. Oil lamps glow. Hair is unbound. There is a softness to their posture, a serenity in their eyes. These are not scenes of public spectacle, but of inward peace. For women especially, the night bath offered privacy and safety. While some public baths allowed mixed hours, many women preferred to bathe at home after nightfall. In the quiet of their
own spaces, they could shed the armor of daily life, garments, duties, expectations, and simply be. The warm
water was a shelter, a mirror of the self. Some added herbs to the water, rosemary for clarity, thyme for courage, rose petals for beauty. These were not luxuries, but acts of care. The bath was a kind of conversation with the body. "You have worked hard," it said. "You are worthy of rest." And when the bath was done, the ritual continued, skin dried with soft cloth, scented oil massaged into limbs, hair combed, perhaps braided, a fresh tunic, sandals placed beside the bed. The body, now cleansed and comforted, slipped into the realm of dreams, more gently than before. The moon might still hang in the sky, the streets might still echo with distant voices. But inside the home, all was still. The bath had done its work. It had quieted the mind, softened the muscles, and carried the bather across the threshold into sleep. In this way, the Romans lived their nights not in darkness, but in gentle radiance. They did not fear the falling of the sun. They welcomed it as a time to return inward, to draw close to warmth, to rest. And though their empire has long since faded, their baths remain in ruins, in writings, and in memory. We walk now among stones that once held water. We touch walls that once echoed with soft laughter. And if we are quiet, very quiet, we might still hear it, the faint splash of a hand in water, the sigh of a tired soul sinking into warmth. A bath by moonlight centuries ago, still rippling through time. There is a stillness in the northern forests just after the snow begins to melt. The trees are bare, but the ground is softening, letting go of the winter's grip. The air is thick with the scent of damp bark and cold earth. Smoke rises gently from a small log cabin, the only sign of life for miles. Inside, a wooden bath is being prepared. It is not grand like the Roman thermae or fragrant like the Eastern hammams, but it is warm, honest, and ancient in its own quiet way. In the northern regions of Europe, places like Scandinavia, Russia, and the Baltic lands, bathing was not merely about cleanliness, it was about survival. Winters were brutal. The sun low in the sky might vanish for days, and yet humans endured. Part of their resilience came from a tradition that seems so simple, yet carried deep meaning. Bathing in wooden tubs heated by fire and often shared with family or community. The bathhouse was usually a separate structure, often small and made of timber. These were not polished constructions. The wood was rough-hewn, sometimes moss-covered, and aged by decades of snow and wind. Inside, the world changed. A central stone hearth held the fire, which heated rocks that in turn heated the water or filled the room with steam. The only light came from the fire itself, flickering against the wet walls and curling steam. In many of these regions, the bath took place not in water, but in heat. The sauna born from these wooden chambers was a ritual older than most. Written records, stones were heated in a pit or stove, then water would be thrown on them to create steam. The people would sit quietly, wrapped in linen or bare-skinned, letting the warmth seep deep into their bones. They did not speak much. The silence was part of the cleansing. There was a calm respect for the space and what it represented. The bath was often followed by a rush into the snow or a dip into an icy stream. This shock to the system was not done for thrill. It was part of balance, heat and cold, stillness and breath. It was believed to strengthen the body, to scare off illness, to refresh the soul, and in many ways it did. In these wooden baths of the north, people found renewal in a world that could be endlessly dark and cold. Tools were simple. A birch, whisk called a vita or venik, was used to gently strike the skin, improving circulation and releasing oils from the birch leaves. The scent was earthy, sharp, and fresh. Buckets of water were poured from wooden ladles. Soap, when available, was often made from animal fat or lye and had a harsh, smoky smell. There were no perfumes or oils, only the raw elements of nature: wood, stone, fire, and water. The bathhouse served more than the body. It was a place of birth and death. In some villages, women gave birth in the steam of the sauna, believed to be clean and warm, safer than the cold air of the home. When someone died, their body was often washed in the same space, the steam seen as purifying for both body and soul. This duality of beginning and ending gave the bathhouse a sacred aura. It was not merely a building, it was a spiritual threshold. Community. Life often pulsed through these bathhouses. In colder months, entire families might gather in the steam, whispering stories or simply sitting in silence. Friends visited each other's saunas as a sign of trust and closeness. Disputes were sometimes settled here, not with loud voices, but through the slow easing of tension in shared heat. The bath was a kind of leveling place. No ranks, no wealth, just sweat and steam. In the northern woods, modesty took on a different shape. Bodies were not hidden nor flaunted. They were natural, practical, and quietly accepted. In the dim warmth of the bathhouse, everyone looked the same, red-cheeked, sweating, half dreaming in the mist. It was a place where the physical and the emotional met without shame. Some bathhouses were set near lakes. In summer, the bath would end with a swim under the stars. The moon reflected
On the water, crickets sang, and the steam from the sauna would rise into the sky like a gentle spirit returning
home. These moments stitched themselves into memory, not grand, but unforgettable. The way the night smelled. The way skin tingled after the cold dip. The way the world felt clean again. In some places, the bathhouse was used only once a week, often before religious observances. Saturday was the traditional day for bathing. In many northern cultures, people would scrub themselves clean before attending church, weddings, or other gatherings. It was a sign of respect both for the self and the community. The construction of these wooden baths changed slowly over centuries. Early versions were simply dug into hillsides with wooden roofs. Later they stood freely, often near rivers or forests. Over time, small benches were added, allowing people to sit at different heights to control how hot the air felt. In colder regions, a small anteroom was built to hold clothes and keep the warmth in. Some even had carved decorations, simple floral patterns or sacred symbols meant to protect those inside. Despite modernization, the wooden bathhouse never truly disappeared. Even today, in Finland, Russia, Estonia, and parts of the Baltic, these saunas still stand. Some are centuries old, their wood darkened and rich with history. Others are rebuilt using modern tools but keeping the ancient design. Families still gather, the fire still roars, and the silence still comforts. There is something timeless about these wooden
baths. Perhaps it is their simplicity, or perhaps it is how close they bring us to the elements, to fire and water, to
breath and silence. In a world that moves quickly, the bathhouse remains slow. It asks nothing. It offers warmth. It listens. The northern bath is not about indulgence, it is about resilience, a response to long winters, aching, muscles, and the deep human need for warmth. It reminds us that healing doesn't always need medicines or luxuries. Sometimes it's just a quiet room, the hiss of steam, and the gentle presence of others. As the chapter closes, we leave behind the thick scent of birch, the wet wood, and the fogged air. We step back into the cold night, skin still warm, heart still slow. And in the distance, behind a wooden door, the fire crackles on. In the hush of an ancient bathhouse where stone met steam and footsteps echoed softly across tiled floors, a quiet figure moved without fuss. No name was spoken, no greeting announced them, but still they were there. Ever present, ever gentle. The bath attendant, always watching, always helping. Their hands weathered but careful, with a hidden rhythm behind every ritual. Before the sun had fully risen over the rooftops of Rome or the misty villages of Japan, attendants were already at work. Fires were stoked beneath bronze boilers, stirring warmth into the water. Towels were folded and neatly stacked, wooden sandals set in orderly rows. Oil lamps flickered along the corridors, catching hints of lemon balm, rose, and cedar. The bathhouse was not yet full, but the work had begun. The bath attendant's job was one of stillness and motion, of silence and touch. They weren't the voices that echoed with gossip or the splash of bodies entering water. They were the hands that smoothed the linen, poured the oils, fetched clean water from the cistern. Their work was gentle and yet essential. Without them, the bathhouse could not breathe. In Rome, these attendants were often slaves or freedmen, assigned to their tasks by status, not by choice. But within the marble walls of the Thermae, something shifted. Their
presence became part of a sacred rhythm. They guided noblemen and commoners alike. They helped the elderly
into the warm pools, steadying them with a hand under the arm. They carried trays of fragrant oil, flicking small
amounts onto the skin with practiced flicks of the wrist. They rinsed, they soothed, they tended. Sometimes their hands scrubbed hard, scouring dead skin with a strigil, the curved bronze tool that rasped across backs and
shoulders. The motion was firm but never cruel. The goal was purification, and the skin, newly pink and alive, bore witness to the ritual. Sometimes they massaged with oils instead, pressing into knots, untying the tensions.
Of labor or worry, they didn't ask questions, they didn't speak unless spoken to, but their touch told a story of
patience. In the Ottoman hammams, the bath attendant was known as the telak. He was often strong, muscular, and graceful in his movements. Turkish baths were spaces of steam and ceremony, and the telak was the silent host. He led guests through each chamber, the warm room, the hot room, the cold rinse. At each stage, his hands worked like instruments of care. He would use rough mitts to exfoliate, then knead tired limbs like dough. Not every hand in history has held power, but these held something else: presence, devotion, understanding. Further east, in Japan's communal bathhouses, the hands were lighter, quieter. Attendance here ensured the atmosphere remained clean, respectful, harmonious. Bathing was not loud, it was almost sacred. Water flowed in. Stillness, towels were modestly kept, and the attendant bowed as they passed. There was no scrubbing or touching here. Their service was in preparation, not physical care, but still the hands mattered. These hands saw countless bodies, young and old, scarred and smooth, regal and worn. Yet they never flinched. They never judged. They touched everyone with the same softness. In the cool morning, they lit the fires. In the heat of midday, they wiped the sweat from stone benches. In the closing hours, they wrung out towels and closed the wooden shutters. They moved like caretakers of a quiet world. And it was not always easy. The air inside these baths was hot, humid, and full of labor. Water was heavy. Towels had to be washed and dried. Sometimes the guests were rude, sometimes they were too ill to speak. And yet the bath attendant never hesitated. They stepped forward, not back. Their fingers learned to carry warmth, not only from the water, but from themselves. In many places, this role was passed down. A father taught his son how to hold the strigil just so. A mother taught her daughter how to fold the towel so it wouldn't unravel. It was a skill, but also a memory. A bathhouse was not merely a place to cleanse the body. It was where people returned after grief, after battle, after birth. The bath was where a woman came after childbirth, where a man came before marriage, where a traveller came after weeks on the road. And always the attendant's hands were there. In some cultures, they became more than helpers. In Roman society, certain bath attendants gained reputations. They were remembered not for their words, but for the way they applied oil, the steadiness of their grip, the peace in their presence.
One might be known for how
gently he washed the elderly. Another for how swiftly she prepared the cold plunge. Their names may be forgotten, but not their care. There's something deeply human about being tended to be held not in affection but in service, to be cleaned not out of love but duty, and yet it becomes love in a different way. The touch of the bath attendant reminded people that they were worthy of care, even in their weariness, even in their silence. Consider the hands themselves, cracked sometimes from the heat and water, wrinkled long before their time, strong from lifting buckets and moving bodies, gentle from practice. These hands spoke a language, all their own, one of oil and heat and cloth, of respect, of calm. In the final hour of the day, as the last guest stepped out into the cool air, the bath attendant remained behind. They checked the stones, emptied the basins, swept the water from the floor. The echoes of laughter and chatter faded. Steam still clung to the walls, but the place was quiet again. And the hands, so busy, so practiced, finally paused. They didn't ask for thanks. Most people didn't even notice them. But something in the memory of the bath lingered. A kindness, a warmth, the feeling of a cloth passed over the shoulder, of oil rubbed into tired skin, of water poured just right. These were the invisible gifts the attendants left behind. In many ways, they were like monks of the body, silent, devoted, repetitive in their rituals. The bathhouse was their temple, the warmth their offering, and the people who came, stripped of titles, of armor, of roles, left feeling just a little more human. And so, history remembers emperors and poets, soldiers and queens. But in the quiet corners of every great bathhouse, there were other lives too. The ones who did not speak loudly. The ones who stood in the background. The ones whose hands shaped the day, and whose work dissolved like steam in the air. Their legacy is not carved in stone, but it remains in the peaceful memory of warmth, in the clean hush of a towel gently laid across the shoulders, in the way we still find comfort in water and care. And if you ever step into a bathhouse, real or imagined, listen. Not to the voices, but to the silence. Watch you for the movement that goes unseen. Feel the care that comes without asking. That is the bath attendant's hands. Long before store shelves gleamed with sweet-scented bars wrapped in waxy paper, and long before factories churned out liquid soaps in bottles with pumps, there was ash and fat. Two humble, overlooked things, grey, dust from fire and thick scraps from animals. This is where soap was born. In the quiet of ancient kitchens, where pots hung over flames and smoke curled gently toward low ceilings, someone first noticed the strange alchemy. When rain trickled down the stone hearth after a heavy storm, it sometimes carried with it a greasy, slick, a slippery film that clung to fingers and smeared the dirt. It was not pleasant, but it was curious. Something had changed in the ashes. The fire pit, where wood was burned down to powdery white, met with water and the leftover drippings from cooked meat. Where these met, lye was born. Not that they knew it by name. They knew only the result. When stirred together in heat, a paste formed, unlovely, gritty, sharp in scent, but when rubbed across skin darkened by dust or smoke, it lifted the grime away. And when washed off with water, the skin beneath felt different, not scented, not soft, but new. That was soap. In Babylon, as early as 2800 BCE, archaeologists have uncovered soap residues in clay jars, remnants of ash and fat mixtures used for cleaning, textiles and possibly bodies. These were not bars, not molded into shapes. Soap was a heavy, grainy paste kept in simple pots near the fire. It was stirred with wooden spoons and applied by hand. Soap was not something you gifted or admired. It was a tool, a worker, a helper in the background of life. The Romans, meticulous in cleanliness, did not always favor soap. Their preference leaned toward oils, rubbed on and scraped off with a curved metal tool called a strigil. But even so, in homes far from the city baths, women and servants would cook their own soaps. Boiled fat from kitchen scraps, pig, goat, sheep, was rendered slowly over hours until it became a smooth, rich base. Wood ash, gathered from the fireplace, was steeped in water to create lye. This caustic liquid was strong, so strong it could sting skin or burn eyes, but mixed carefully with the fat, it changed. It became something new. The mixture was cooked low and slow, stirred with care. It thickened as it cooled, turning from liquid to sludge to solid. Then it was poured into simple molds, wooden frames lined with cloth or pressed into shallow bowls. These early soaps had no added scent. They bore the smells of the fire, of charred wood and tallow, but they worked, and that was what mattered. In rural homes, women became the keepers of soap. It was their labor often that rendered the fat, that strained the ash water through straw or cloth, that watched the bubbling pots so they did not boil over. Soap making was domestic alchemy. Dangerous, demanding, and essential. There were no gloves, no thermometers, only instinct, experience, and the quiet courage of repetition. Soap was stored away for future use, in small jars near the wash basin, in soft cloth, bundles under kitchen shelves, in clay crocks beside the laundry tubs. It was applied to rough cloths or hands, and scrubbed into skin browned by sun and sweat. Children were cleaned before feast days with it. Elders had their feet washed in it. It left behind a faint smell of smoke, a trace of the fire it came from. In Northern Europe, as soap making spread, it took on variations. Ashes from hardwoods created stronger lye. Animal fats varied with diet and region. Some used butterfat, others used lard. Olive oil in regions where it was plentiful made for gentler soap, less harsh on skin, more luxurious in feel. This gave rise to Castile soap in the Iberian Peninsula, where olive oil became the base of a finer product. This soap was closer to what we think of today, firm, creamy, and nearly white. Still, it remained a household task, not an industry. For centuries, soap remained. tied to necessity. It was not beauty, but labor. The hands that made it were often raw, nicked from work, stained by wood smoke and dye, and yet they created something transformative. In Islamic cultures, soap making advanced through chemistry. Scholars in the medieval Islamic world refined the process, understanding the science behind saponification, the name for that magical reaction between fat and lye. They introduced scents to rosewater, musk, herbs like thyme and lavender. Their soaps were still handmade, but they became softer, more fragrant, shaped in molds with symbols or calligraphy. In Aleppo, Syria, laurel oil was blended with olive oil to create soaps so revered that traders carried them across deserts and seas. Soap slowly traveled. It rode in wagons and on ships. In Europe, it remained a domestic art until the rise of cities, and with them, the rise of disease. By the 1600s, as plagues swept through crowded streets, the importance of washing became clearer. And so soap found its way from kitchens to workshops. Guilds of soap makers formed. Recipes were guarded, refined. Soap became a product, but still in many homes, soap was made by hand, especially in rural villages, where women kept the tradition alive through generations. A girl learned from her mother how to judge the lie's strength by floating an egg in the solution. If it bobbed halfway, the lie was ready. If it sank, it was too weak. If it floated high, too strong. There were no instruments, only the wisdom passed down through touch and trial. There was a rhythm to it. The boiling, the stirring, the waiting. Children watched from corners, fascinated and afraid as the bubbling mass thickened. They'd be sent to gather ashes or to stir the pot slowly with a long stick. The scent of hot fat and smoke filled the home. And when the soap was finally ready, poured into molds and cooled into thick slabs, it was left to cure, sometimes for weeks, before it was firm enough to use. These blocks were cut with wire or knives, the edges were rough, the colors dull, but inside each one was the memory of fire, the labor of hands, and the promise of cleanliness, and cleanliness mattered. In an age without antibiotics, without antiseptics, without running water in every home, soap saved lives. It was not glamorous, it did not sparkle, but it washed away sickness, it scrubbed off the day's labor, it marked the boundary between filth and health, between ritual and routine. Even as the world changed, factories rose and soap became perfumed and boxed. This ancient story remained underneath. Even the finest luxury soaps today owe something to that first bubbling pot of fat and ash, to the unknown hands who stirred it, to the hearths where rainwater met grease and turned it into something more. The earliest soaps didn't promise beauty, they promised effort. They came with the scent of the earth, the sting of labor, the feel of rough cloth. They were not purchased. They were earned, through heat, through patience, through care. And perhaps that's the quiet magic of them. That something so simple, ashes and fat, could become a gesture of love. A mother washing her child's face, husband cleaning his hands before a meal, a servant carefully scrubbing a master's back. Soap was not just a cleaner. It was a witness to care, to intimacy, to the small acts that tied people to each other. Today, we may
lather without thinking. We pump bottles and watch foam dissolve. But deep beneath that froth is a story.
Ancient, smoky, human, a story of invention born not from luxury, but need, of hands that worked again and again to create something that did not shine but did cleanse. In ash and fat, they found transformation. And in soap, they gave us the gift of ritual. A daily act repeated across time, a bath, a washing, a renewal. The The streets were not yet empty, but the day was ending. In the winding alleys of ancient towns, whether in Rome, Antioch, or a tiny Gallic village, there came a sound that did not belong to the market or the forum. It did not belong to the army, or to the temple, or to the cries of children playing in the dust. It was a small thing.
Really, just a chime. Sometimes a soft bell struck once, other times a series of metal rings, resonant and even.
But always familiar, always welcome. The bathhouse bell. For those who knew its rhythm, it was more than a sound. It was a calling, a ritual, a kindness. When the bell rang, it meant something sacred was about to begin. Not sacred like a priest's blessing, but sacred like the return home. It was time to let go of the weight of the day, to place down your burden of sweat, dust, ash, and thought. It was time to bathe not just the body but the spirit in the great cities of empire where thousands lived elbow to elbow and the press of life never seemed to ease. The bathhouse bell rang like relief itself. It came late in the afternoon, usually before dusk. Workers in tunics, faces sun-worn and shoulders aching from stone and wheat, paused at its sound. Shopkeepers closed shutters. Scribes wiped ink from their fingers. Children stopped chasing pigeons and instead began to tug at their mothers' sleeves, begging to go. In these cities, public baths were not a luxury, they were life. You may have lived in a tenement with no fresh water, a small window, and no privacy at all. But once the bell rang, that didn't matter.
You could take your coin, just one, sometimes less, and walk to warmth. The caldarium steamed for
you. The tepidarium waited. The frigidarium stood ready for the bold. The bathhouse bell echoed through arches and across bridges. Sometimes it was rung by the bath attendant himself, stepping out onto a small balcony with a simple handbell. In other places it was a child's job, one small enough to slip between customers, but old enough to know when to strike the chime. In some larger towns the bell was fixed atop a post and pulled with a worn rope, long and frayed from years of evening greetings. But bells did not ring only in the grand cities. In smaller towns and countryside villages, the sound had a different meaning. There, it wasn't about relief from the crush of the day, it was about togetherness, about ritual. A rural bathhouse might only open on certain days, perhaps twice a week or only on feast days. When its bell rang, it summoned not individuals but a community. Farmers would wash their hands in troughs, brush off the dust, and begin walking. Women would gather towels. Boys and girls, laughing, always laughing, ran ahead. No one rushed. There was no need. The bell was not urgent. It was an invitation, not a demand. In those moments, the village gathered not just to bathe, but to speak, to catch up, to gossip, to argue, to sing. The bathhouse, for a few hours, became the center of life. Of course, not everyone went every time. There were those too old, too ill, or simply too proud. But even they heard the bell. And even they, in some quiet part of themselves, acknowledged what it meant. It meant care. It meant time had passed, and now rest could come. In colder places, the bell was a herald of heat. Imagine hearing that chime as snow began to fall or as wind shook the shutters. You would pull your cloak tighter, tuck the towel under your
arm and hurry toward the bathhouse. The first who arrived might help stoke the fires. The second would bring oil for the lamps. And as the steam rose, fogging the windows and curling through the rafters, the bell's memory
would echo even after it fell silent. In some cultures, the bathhouse bell was shaped like a lotus.
In others it was
made from iron with simple rivets, its tone low and round. A few had inscriptions, short prayers or dedications. At this place bring peace, read one in the ruins of Carthage. Another in the corner of a remote Iberian bathhouse read simply, "Key, come home." There were rules about when the bell rang. It was never struck before the fires were ready or before the water was warm. In some towns it rang twice, once to announce the bathhouse's opening and once more as it was about to close. That second bell was softer, slower, a reminder that the dream must end, that the warmth, though comforting, must be left behind. Outside, the night awaited, but inside, for just a little longer, time could be forgotten. In the darkness beyond the bell, the city or village resumed its breath. Dogs barked, horses stamped, lamps were lit in narrow rooms, but within the bathhouse, quiet laughter and the splash of water echoed gently. Attendants moved silently, folding linens, pouring water into bowls, ladling hot water over tired shoulders. And still in the mind of each visitor, the echo of the bell remained, a gentle, metallic memory shimmering like the last light on a surface of still water. For some, the bell was associated with healing. In Roman times, it was believed that the transition from heat to cold and the cleansing that followed could ward off illness, and so the bell was also a kind of medicine. Its sound was hope, not loud, not boastful, but consistent. Even in times of war or scarcity, the bell often rang. It might be fainter or less frequent, but when it did ring, people still came, perhaps fewer than before, perhaps more solemnly, but they came for the water, for the warmth, for the memory of peace. And long after the empires fell, long after the great roads cracked and the mosaics faded, the idea of the bathhouse bell remained. It lived on in other cultures, in other places, sometimes as a drum, sometimes a horn, sometimes just the creak of a gate. But the idea was the same. That sound could summon comfort. In the end, the bell was not about the building or the water or even the ritual. It was about what it meant. It meant you were not alone, that you were welcome, that someone had lit a fire, poured water, made ready a place for you. And when the bells stopped, and the doors closed, and the lamps were extinguished, the echo lingered. It stayed in the stone, in the steam, in the silence. It waited for tomorrow. In the earliest quiet of the morning, before sunlight could warm the temple stones, or roosters could announce the day the waters stirred. They were not loud, not crashing, nor flowing in haste. They shimmered, gently, patiently, waiting for the touch of hands made reverent by belief. These were not just waters drawn from wells or rivers. These were sacred, set apart, watched over, and poured with care. Throughout human history, the act of bathing has not only served to cleanse the body, but to awaken the soul. Where the world was ancient and silence often mingled with smoke and incense, water played the role of messenger. It whispered to the gods. It purified the living. It washed away not just dirt, but doubt. In temples, shrines, and sacred groves, water was the threshold. To step into the sacred, one first had to pass through water. In ancient Mesopotamia, priests would bathe before offering sacrifices. They did not dare approach their gods with hands that had touched the dust of common roads. Bathing was a form of apology, a way to say, "I know I am small, but I come with honor." In these temple cities, where ziggurats rose like stepped stairways toward heaven, the priests washed not for health, But for holiness, they believed that water carried away invisible weights, the pride, the anger, the impurity that clung to a man's spirit like smoke to his cloak. In ancient Israel, the mikveh served a similar purpose. It was not a pool for pleasure, but for restoration. Men and women entered it not to relax, but to renew. Built from stone, filled with living water, rain, or water drawn from a natural spring, the mikveh invited quiet descent. One stepped in slowly, fully submerged, and emerged not only clean, but changed. It marked transitions from impurity to purity, from old life to new, from the ordinary to the sacred. Brides entered before marriage. Priests
entered before service. It was not about sin, it was about readiness. One could not face the sacred until they had
paused, bowed, and been made still by the water. Far to the east, in the temples of Varanasi and the ghats that
line the Ganges, water has long been seen as a gift from the divine. The river is not just a body of water, it is
Maganga, a living goddess. Pilgrims descend the stone steps, barefoot, often weeping softly, their hands cupped in prayer. They do not wash as we do. They immerse themselves as an offering. The river does not simply cleanse, it absolves. Dipping into it, people believe, can break the cycle of rebirth. Even the dead are brought to her banks, where funeral pyres crackle beside the water and ashes return to the flow. The ghats are loud with devotion, but the moment of bathing is deeply personal. One closes their eyes and for a moment floats between this world and something beyond. In Japan, where tradition folds itself carefully into every aspect of life, bathing is a ritual of precision and grace. At the Shinto shrines scattered across the islands, visitors pause at the Tamizia, the purification fountain. A ladle of water is lifted, poured over the left hand, then the right, then the mouth. One does not enter the shrine casually. Every gesture is slow, deliberate, sacred, and at home, the practice of bathing is no less meaningful. Before entering the wooden tub, one scrubs the body clean. The bath itself is not for washing, it is for soaking, for contemplating, for resetting the mind. In Buddhist monasteries, monks follow similar traditions, bathing not just for cleanliness, but to honor the temple of the body in which their spirit dwells. In ancient Rome, public baths were grand and social, but the act of bathing still bore traces of older sacred customs. In private homes, women preparing for marriage were bathed with oils and herbs by older women, symbols of transition and blessing. And among certain Roman cults like that of Isis or Mithras, ritual washing was central to initiation. To pass into the mystery, one first had to wash away the self they had been. In the deserts of the Arabian Peninsula, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, introduced practices
of cleanliness that wove the sacred into the everyday. Ablution, wudu, became not just a routine, but a
reminder. Before every prayer, Muslims wash the hands, the face, the arms, the feet. The water touches the skin, gently, but the soul feels it more deeply. It says, "Leave the world behind, stand now before your Creator." And when water is scarce, the earth itself becomes a tool for purification, tayammum, as the hands touch clean soil. In this, cleanliness is not about appearance, it is about intention, it is about reverence. Even among the ancient Celts, bathing held ritual weight. In sacred springs and forest pools, Druids performed rites of healing. CT, waters were believed to hold spirits, guardians of place and time. Coins were tossed in not for luck, but as
offerings. The person who bathed there did not emerge merely refreshed, they were blessed, reborn, part of a
landscape that was alive with memory. Across the Pacific, in the islands of Polynesia, water was also tied to mana, spiritual energy. Before ceremonies, chiefs and shamans bathed in ocean shallows or freshwater pools, sometimes with crushed herbs or sea salt. These rituals were private, often performed in silence, and among the Maori of New Zealand, water was part of tapu, a system of sacredness and restriction. One did not pollute sacred water with careless touch. It was not just physical, it was spiritual law. Even in Christian tradition, the act of baptism is born of this ancient link between water and spirit. Whether by full immersion in a river or a few drops poured upon a child's forehead, the message is the same. You are not the same as you were before. Sea is a symbol of death and resurrection, of cleansing and rebirth. The early followers of Christ baptized in secret, places rivers at dusk or pools in catacombs, because what they were doing was more than ritual. It was a quiet revolution of the soul. And in the simplest of traditions, like washing one's feet before entering a home, the sacred is folded into hospitality. In many parts of the world, it is still common to offer guests water to wash with. It is not about cleanliness, it is about dignity. It says, "You are welcome here, you matter." In ancient times, this gesture held deep meaning. In the dusty roads of Judea or the worn paths of Greece, feet were calloused, weary. Washing them was not just kind, it was a form of humility. Even today, this act appears in spiritual practice. On Holy Thursday, Christians reenact Christ washing the feet of his disciples, bending low to show that love begins with service. What binds all these traditions is not water itself, but the way it is used, with intention, with silence, with the understanding that we are, all of us, more than bodies, that the soul needs washing too, not with soap, but with meaning. The bath in the temple, the stream in the forest, the small basin by the shrine, they all remind us that we must pause, that before we enter the sacred we must first be still. Water teaches us to slow down, to feel, to release, to prepare. It is no wonder then that even in the most modern of temples, hospitals, courts, places of study, water remains close, a basin by the door, a fountain in the hallway. We still wash our
hands before holding a newborn. We still cleanse our face after tears. We still soak in warm water when grief has
made us heavy. These are not habits, they are quiet rituals, leftovers of a deeper truth we have not forgotten.
Bathing in its most ancient sense is not indulgence, it is restoration, it is a return. And in every time and place,
when one bends over water, they are, if only for a moment, connected to something larger than themselves, to the divine, to tradition, to others who, long before, stood on the edge of a river or a bath, closed their eyes and
let the water take what was no longer needed. So the next time you touch water, when you bathe or wash your hands or step into rain, pause for a second, listen, feel it, let it cleanse not only your skin, but the weight you
didn't know you were carrying. In the quiet corners of ancient homes, before the noise of street vendors rose with the dawn, before the bustle of the market filled the air with its sharp calls and clinking coins, something softer stirred. It wasn't the crowing of the rooster or the creak of shutters being opened. It was the rain, a gentle drumming on the rooftop. 1,000 tiny fingers tapping the earth, whispering that the sky had opened its hands again. The ancients knew this sound intimately. Long before plumbing, faucets, or pressurized water pipes, they looked up, not down, for their water. The sky was a reservoir, and the rain was a blessing, not merely an inconvenience or a backdrop for poetry. but something far more sacred, a resource, a cleanser, a gift. In many Roman and Mediterranean homes, roofs were carefully designed. They weren't just for shelter, they had purpose. Flat or slightly sloped they were, built to gather water. Guttering systems, simple stone or baked clay channels, guided the rain as it fell, collecting it into cisterns carved beneath the house. You might walk into a courtyard and not know beneath your
feet was a reservoir fed directly from the clouds. The first drops were always met with reverence. Children were
often the first to hear it. Sitting on stone steps, playing with pebbles or practicing letters scratched into dust, they would pause, lift their heads and smile. The adults would look up too, perhaps pausing a prayer, a chore or a conversation. "It rains," someone would say, not in surprise but in acknowledgement, like recognizing a long-awaited guest. On days when the skies opened wide, the routine shifted. The wash basins would be placed outside, stone jars tilted to catch the flow, linen cloths soaked for later scrubbing. Soap was rarely needed. Rainwater had a purity that made the skin feel clean with no additives. It was cool, soft to the touch, and had a certain scent, something clean, untamed and old. It smelled of open air and far-off lands. Many believed rain held power, not magical in the sense of spells and curses, but sacred in a quiet, everyday way. In Greece, say, newborn's first bath was often with rainwater, an introduction to the world using the world's own gift. In rural Judea, clay pots filled with rainwater were used to rinse after burial rites, washing away sorrow and blessing memory. In Egypt, even in the heart of dry lands, when rain did come, it was a cause for celebration. Temples recorded its coming. Priests offered thanks. This reverence wasn't just symbolic. Rain was life. Wells could run dry. Rivers could be diverted, but the sky was shared. Everyone had a roof, however humble, and everyone could, in some way, catch what fell. It was the great equalizer. A poor family might not have slaves, fine clothes, or exotic oils, but they could still bathe in something beautiful. In those homes where candlelight flickered against damp stone, the act of bathing in rainwater became ritualistic. The water, cooler than from the well, required courage. A woman would shiver slightly as she ladled it over her shoulder, her arms marked by goosebumps, but a smile would play at her lips. The cold was welcome, cleansing, alive. Afterward, she would towel herself dry with linen worn soft by years of use, the scent of the rain lingering faintly in her hair. Her children, freshly bathed, would sit nearby, watching the raindrops race each other down clay pots, each child secretly picking a favorite to root for. The oldest might be asked to climb the stairs to the rooftop to check that the flow from the gutters wasn't clogged with leaves. Up there, he'd stand for a moment, face turned upward, letting the drops strike his cheeks like the world's gentlest applause. Not every culture saw rain the same way. In northern lands where the weather was more severe, people built steep, sloping roofs to let snow and rain slide off. They still caught water, but less ceremoniously. In places like Gaul and Germania, cisterns were rarer. Rivers and lakes were more common. Yet even there, when a sudden spring shower burst through the clouds, voices would fall silent for a moment. Soldiers paused in their training. Smiths at their forges leaned back to watch steam rise from the anvils, and mothers, their hands still deep in bread dough, smiled at the sound of dripping. Eves, it wasn't just about washing. Rain was used to rinse food, clean clothes, wipe floors, and even bless thresholds. Some households believed that a bowl of rainwater left by the door would bring peace. Others mixed it with herbs, lavender, mint, bay leaf, to use as fragrant water for guests. There was something deeply human in that gesture. Here, welcome, wash your hands with the sky. Rituals emerged around this water. Before a wedding, a bride might be bathed in the first rain of spring. Before a harvest festival, farmers would use rainwater to clean tools, believing it brought luck. In towns, streets would clear when it rained, not out of fear, but out of respect. Let the world be washed, let the city breathe. Inside the bathhouses, rainwater was not often used, it was too precious, but for personal washing, for quiet moments in courtyards and behind wooden screens, it was cherished. No heated caldarium or scented oils could replace the feeling of cold, clean rain.
Touching the skin, it connected people to something larger, something unreachable.
You could not own the sky, but you could borrow from it. In times of drought, people would speak of rain as if of a loved one gone away. It
hasn't visited in many days, they'd say. Old women would look at cloudless skies with narrowed eyes. Farmers
would lift dry soil and let it crumble between their fingers. Water stored in cisterns would be rationed. A single ladle for washing, one for cooking, the rest saved for need. And then one night it would return. First a wind, then a scent, then a soft patter. The rain. It didn't knock, it didn't announce. It just came, as it always had, falling across roofs and terraces into jars and open mouths turned upward. Children would wake, rush outside, feel the cold and scream with delight. Parents would follow slowly, standing under the eaves, watching their barrels fill. In literature, poets wrote of it. The sky weeps, one wrote, but its sorrow is sweet. Others described how lovers met under the rain, shared blankets afterward, warmed by water and skin. Some stories told of rain as a message from gods. Others saw it as a rebirth, an undoing of dust and toil. Today, we press buttons and turn knobs. We wash with water that moves through invisible pipes. It is easy, efficient, clean, but it
lacks that same intimacy, that same pause, that moment of listening to a roof and realizing the world has offered you something, a gift that cannot be bought or bottled. In the end, rain on the roof wasn't just about
water. It was about rhythm, connection, presence, a reminder that some of the best things in life fall freely. They come softly, and if you are still and quiet and grateful, you might just catch them. The day ends slowly in the bathhouse, not suddenly, not with alarm, but with a gentle tapering like the final. Notes of a lullaby carried on the breath of warm air. The water no longer splashes. The voices, once echoing through the vaulted chambers, have softened. Only the quiet patter of feet against wet stone remains. A whisper of presence amid the fading warmth. Steam still clings to the walls, like mist that doesn't wish to leave. It curls into the corners, dances above the pools, and lingers near the lanterns. But even it seems to know that the day is
over. That the baths, once alive with the laughter of children, the quiet murmurs of women, the philosophical
debates of old men, now prepare for sleep. The attendants move slowly through the space. Their feet are bare, their robes damp at the hem. They carry long-handled scoops and wooden buckets, working with muscle, memory. Sweep, pour, rinse. They guide the remaining water toward the stone drains at the edges of the room, where it gurgles and disappears. A task repeated countless times, but always with care. No rush, no complaints. only rhythm. One bather remains. He sits at the edge of the warm pool, elbows on knees, head bowed. His hair is wet and clings to his temples. The folds of his robe are gathered beside him, resting on the dry tiles. He is in no hurry. Not because he has nowhere to be, but because he understands something essential. This moment, this pause, is part of the ritual. A final breath before returning to the world. He dips his hand into the water. It is cooler now, no longer steaming, but it is still soft, still smooth, still gentle on the skin. He lets the water slip through his fingers, watching it fall in droplets back into the pool. Time seems to stretch here, the outside world, forgotten. Outside, the city of stone and fire carries on. The sound of sandals on cobblestone, a vendor calling, out the price of figs, a mother scolding her child, the creak of a cartwheel. But in the bathhouse, all that fades. The tiled chamber becomes its own world. Still, warm, sacred. This was always the power of the baths. Not just a place for cleaning the body, but for softening the soul, for washing away more than sweat or dirt, for rinsing off the weight of arguments, failures, unspoken grief. A quiet baptism at day's end where no priest was needed, only water and time. The lone bather finally stands. Water trails down his back, his legs, his arms. He does not shiver. The air is cool, but his body is warm. He moves with ease, joints loosened, breath steady. He gathers his robe and wraps it around himself, the fabric catching on damp skin. The attendants nod as he passes. He nods back. No words, just respect. They have all shared in this space, created something together, even if only briefly. The warmth, the stillness, the peace. It was theirs for a little while. As he steps into the changing room, the door swings shut behind him. The light inside the main bath dims further. One by one, the lanterns are extinguished. A hiss, a flicker, then darkness. The stone glows faintly from the heat, still trapped in its bones. Outside the bathhouse, the sky turns violet. The first stars appear, shy and blinking. Smoke drifts lazily from chimneys. Somewhere, a lute begins to play, but none of that reaches the now empty chamber. It is silent again.
Resting. Waiting. There's something almost sacred about this emptiness, about the way the chamber returns to
itself when all the people are gone, as if the walls can breathe again, as if the water, now drained, can dream of the morning, when it will be heated and poured once more. The bathhouse is a creature with a heartbeat, one that slows at night but never fully stops. In older times, when temples still rose beside rivers and priests performed rites beneath open sky, bathing was part of worship. And even now, even in this city of trade and empire, something of that reverence remains. The bathhouse is not just architecture, it is memory, it is ritual, it is a cradle for the tired, the lonely, the aching. It offers warmth without question, steam without judgment. It takes in all who enter and lets them leave lighter. At night, when the final light goes out, it does not die. It rests, knowing the morning will bring voices again, laughter again, life again. And as the last attendant closes the outer door and walks into the night, the bathhouse sleeps, but the warmth lingers in the stone, in the air, and in the hearts of all who passed through. The baths are empty now, not just of water and voices, but of the rhythms that once stirred their walls, the soft sound of bare feet on stone, the quiet splash of cupped hands, The murmurs of friends, of strangers, of old men, sinking into warmth and young children squealing at the first cold rinse. These places are silent, and yet they are not gone. In the hollow echoes of an ancient caldarium or the cool shade of a village cistern, you can still feel them, not in sound but in presence. The breath of steam against the air, the worn stone that once cradled backs, the grooves in the marble from countless hands resting, waiting, being still, across centuries in temples and
houses and bustling bathhouses. People returned again and again to water, for cleansing, for care, for calm, and
always for something more than hygiene. They came for connection, with each other, with their bodies, with something beyond. This series has taken us quietly through that world, a world where water was not just a necessity but a ritual, a rhythm of life, a language spoken with bowls and basins and steam. We began in stillness before the first splash, watching as a pot of water warmed by candlelight. We followed villagers and monks, farmers and noblewomen, watching how they prepared for the day. A hand cupping water to the face, a child learning to scrub, a family gathering by the river's edge, and then we entered the baths. There were great ones with mosaic floors and columns open to the sky, where citizens walked barefoot from tepidarium to caldarium to frigidarium, their conversations blending with the sounds of dripping water and echoing laughter. There were simple ones, wooden tubs in northern forests, where water had to be carried, heated, and shared. And there were sacred ones, built not just to cleanse the skin, but to prepare the soul for something holy. Some bathed in silence, others came to talk, to gossip, to be seen. Some came alone, others as families, but they all came, drawn by the pull of warm water and soft light, by the promise of renewal. We met the attendants, quiet, skilled, respectful. Their hands moved with practiced care. They worked in the background, unseen by most, yet
central to the experience. The bath was not just a place, it was a performance. And these attendants were its
silent choreographers. We saw how water was gathered from wells, from rain, from rivers, how soaps were made lumpy and grey, stirred from ash and fat, not for fragrance, but for function. How homes had flat roofs to collect rain, how jars were set out like offerings. Even the sky, it seemed, wished to participate. And then, slowly, the day ended. The last bather stepped out. The steam faded, the fire cooled, and the bathhouse became quiet. Once more, its walls holding on to the last warmth of the day. That is where we are now, at the close. But what
lingers is not just the memory of a place, it is a feeling, a gentleness, a rhythm, because bathing in these
worlds was not rushed. It was not background noise. It was not squeezed into 5 minutes before work or multitasked between emails. It was something else entirely. It was time carved out for the self and for others. A pause, a deep breath, a letting go, and in today's world, rushed, buzzing, ever hungry for speed, there is something radical about that. Something almost rebellious in the idea of taking your time to wash your hands, your face, your feet, not just as routine, but as ritual, as a reminder that you are here, that your body matters, that warmth, silence, and care still have a place. Maybe you won't light candles for your next bath. Maybe you don't have a basin carved from stone or an attendant to warm your towels, but perhaps you'll remember to pause, to feel the water, to be still, because in that pause, something ancient stirs, something that echoes through history, through Rome and Kyoto and Babylon, through rain-soaked rooftops and flickering lanterns, through the steam of a quiet bath. It tells us, you are not just a worker, a doer, a hurried shape in motion. You
are a body, a spirit, a being that needs care. And that care can be simple. A splash of water, a clean towel, a
breath. That is enough. So tonight or tomorrow, or whenever you next reach for water, whether in a shower or at a sink, pause for a moment. Let your hands feel the warmth. Let your breath slow. Let the water speak. It carries stories older than any written word. Stories of people like you, tired, hopeful, searching for stillness. And it offers you the same thing it offered them. A return to the self, to stillness, to something sacred. The
baths may be empty, the bells may be silent, but their spirit lingers in the steam, in the warmth, in you.
good night.